Welcome to the Know Your Legacy podcast. I'm your host, Vipul Basania, and today's guest is Eric Edmeades. Eric is an international speaker, author, serial entrepreneur, and he's helped a lot of people through the various companies that he's had, but most prominently, Wildfit has been one of the most famous ones that's helped people approach health and well-being across the world from a whole new perspective. So Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Hey, no worries. Thanks for having me.
So just before we get into, I guess, a couple of things about health, Wildfit, because I know that's the area that is, your predominant area of expertise. Let's rewind back the clock all the way to like sort of the age of sort of 8 to 10, how you got into this adventurous life and how you created the life that you're now living.
8 to 10?
Yeah.
It's funny. I was reading a long time ago, some article on psychology, and it said that little boys will typically grow up to be, very much like whoever they idolized in that window, 8 to 11, it said in the article. And so I was talking to my wife about that, and I said, so based on the way I'm living right now, who do you think my idols were? And she goes, well, I'm going to have to go with Han Solo and Indiana Jones. And I was like, well, that pretty much fits. I would go with that. And then there's another less popular show called Hogan's Heroes. And there was a particular character in there who was always running the PW camp and wheeling and dealing and, very good guy, but always like manipulating the Germans to get what he wanted out of the thing. And one day she and I are watching that show and, like old YouTube, like you can watch some of the old, we're just watching it out of a sense of like nostalgic history or something. And she sees a couple of episodes with Hogan and she goes, Eric, how old were you when you were watching this show? And I said, 8 to 11. She goes, that explains a lot to me. And so, I had a lot of good influences, outside of TVs and movies and stuff. My dad, I had a very, interesting upbringing as far as my dad went on. On one side, my dad was dealing with alcoholism and, all that stuff that made growing up maybe more challenging than was necessary. But at the same time, my dad was also real, as I was growing up, was always a real adventurer, going fishing in the Amazon and taking us on really cool camping trips and stuff. So I think that the combination of having a tough childhood, but also having a childhood with a sense of adventure and that kind of stuff really influenced the way I would grow up and the way I would end up expressing my life.
Yeah, because I think it said that, like, I think everything that we learn during that time, everything leading up to that age is pretty much what programs us for the rest of our life, unless we take the time to unlearn that stuff and then relearn the stuff that we do want to learn. So what were the sorts of things that you were picking up? Like what were your interests? Because obviously now it seems like you've managed to pick up things to purposely create the life you're living. So did you even think about living a life that you're living now? Or is that something that came later?
No, I mean, it's a weird combination. I would tell you that even as a small boy, I remember feeling like I was supposed to do big things. I remember even as a little boy, I used to practice. I know this is odd, but I would actually practice my autograph, like thinking one day people are going to want my autograph. Even when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. If you look at an old school book of mine, you'll find my name scrawled in a bunch of different fonts in different ways. On one side, I had this sense of guided destiny that I needed, that I would do something in the world. And, but if I were to go back now and go back and talk to me at, 18, 17 years old and say, by the way, you're going to buy George Lucas's special effects company and work on movies like Avatar, Pirates of the Caribbean, and you're going to start a medical simulation company that will win awards from the U.S. Army and Congress, that you'll start a health transformation company that will get you a medal from the Canadian Senate. If I go back and say any of that to me at 17 years old, I'm sorry, 17-year-old me would call bullshit. Like, no, that's too much. And so it's hard to say what it is that, I will tell you that on the positive side, my family always gave me a real sense of legacy. My family has done some fascinating things in the world. My grandfather on my mother's side was a famous orthopedic surgeon and developed all kinds of interesting techniques that are still in use today. And I was always aware of that as a kid. And on my grandmother's side, her father was a minister in the South African parliament that helped, that proposed the formation of the Kruger National Park, which in my opinion is one of the most important pieces of land on earth. And so, yeah, and on my dad's side, his grandfather was a famous archaeologist, zoologist who discovered the oldest Homo sapien skull in the world. And there's a funny thing about growing up with this idea that these incredible people are in your genetic past. And so I think that on a positive side, that gave me a sense that I was supposed to do some stuff. And on a not so positive side, I grew up with a ton of uncertainty. You know, my dad was an alcoholic. My parents split up when I was young. At 15 years old, I was literally homeless. I was homeless on the streets of Edmonton, Alberta in the winter, which is, you know, and so, but what that meant was that even at 6 and 7 years old, there were things going on in my life where I realized that I wasn't able to trust the adults around me, and that my destiny, you know, and I don't mean I wasn't able to trust them. I don't mean it like that. My mom is an incredible mother and still is. And, you know, doing the best that she could in a house of insanity and oddness. And my dad is a great father and doing the best that he could dealing with addiction and stuff. So I don't mean I couldn't trust them that they were bad. I just meant that things were going on that meant that I had to be responsible for my own safety. And so even as a young kid, I think I had this feeling that I was responsible for my safety. I was responsible for my little brother's safety. And I think that some of that independence has, you know, kind of directed me in life.
That's incredible, because I think a lot of us it's not typical for people to grow up in a family where their ancestors or their parents have done those sorts of things. So like, what did it feel like to find that out, the fact that they've done such big work?
Well, you know, I didn't find it out, you know, I just grew up with it. Like, you know, I mean, maybe I did find it out but, you know, at an age where it was like, oh, there's just a fact you're telling me. But as I got older and began to recognize what those things meant, you know, that they've left a mark on the world that is permanent. You know, my great grandfather's discovery will always be a major part of the human evolutionary story. It will always be there. And you know, and my great grandfather on their side, you know, proposing the formation of the Kruger Park, that is legacy. I can't say I discovered those things. I think I grew up with them. But I'll tell you, I had a really interesting event happen recently about this, and that is that my wife and I were having, you know, once a month we have minimally once a month we have date nights where we go away for the night. We get there's a villa down the beach here. We go rent that villa. It's crazy because we live on the beach here, but it's a night of just us, adulting, not having to worry about whether the baby's going to wake up and all that stuff. And so on one of our recent ones, we were having this conversation, and Elise said to me, you know, it's really interesting. You often have a sense of certainty that I can't relate to. Like, no matter what's going on, we've been through some tough stuff in our marriage, you know, in our business life while we were married. You know, that same movie studio that we bought, the one that used to belong to George Lucas, I mean, that ended up being, from a business perspective, one of the most exciting, interesting, but colossally terrible investment decisions. And we went through a lot of stress as a result of it. And she says, oddly, you seem to handle that stuff with a level of fortitude and certainty. Like, where does that come from? And so we started talking a little bit about that. And when I started talking about my family and you know, my back, she's like, wow, you know, that's incredible. She says, I have a great connection with, I don't have that. I don't have that legacy. And I said, but you do. And she goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, you realize the moment I asked you to marry me, you became part of that legacy. And she went, I did? And I said, 100%. First of all, we have a child in that legacy. And secondly, if anything ever happened to me, my family would be there for you in every conceivable way. You are now part of that. And you know what's really interesting is once she tapped into it and realized that my legacy was now also her legacy, it really changed her level of confidence in the world and her confidence as a mom and all that kind of stuff. So I think that I do think there's a lot of value in looking into our past and realizing, and you know, you said it, interestingly, a lot of people don't feel like they have that kind of legacy, but I would put to you that I think everybody does. Sure, it might not be a Guinness Book of World Record or a Nobel Prize, but let's just think about this. 20 generations ago, you had 1 million ancestors. Do the math. 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 16, 32, 64, 20 back, it's 1 million. And those 1 million people survived in the most unlikely conditions. 80% infant mortality, large animals that specialized in hunting humans, other humans that wanted to kill humans, diseases, famine, no refrigerator to store food. They survived through the most incredible things. And so we all have that legacy. And I think the more we can tap into it, the more we can recognize that we're destined for greatness as well.
I love that, because one of the quotes that actually stands out to me that I was thinking about as you were speaking was by Maya Angelou, and I've said it on this with other episodes so many times before, and it's, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And
Yeah.
that's what drives me every day and gets me through the tough times, whatever challenges I'm facing. And I try and help other people see that perspective, because as you said rightly, you don't need to have parents or grandparents who've done like a Guinness Book of World Record, but the fact that they survived, like they had to go through some hardship, and for you to be perfectly aligned, to be born in this time, to have the technology, to have this camera, to have this microphone, for us to connect. You're in the Dominican Republic, I'm in London. Like, you have to think about how simple but crazy that is at the same time. So, I mean, do you think that's the one driver that pushes you through, or has pushed you through your journey up to this point?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I don't know that I really tapped into how important it's been in my journey until recently, but I do. I think it's been a big part of it. It's just, you know, I remember when I held a cast of my grandfather's skull that he found, and I held it in my hand, and I thought to myself, you know, it represents a 259,000-year-old person. And I want you to think about what that means. That means that, you know, if you think about like the pyramids are 3,500 years ago, that's like 10 minutes compared to, you know, the 259,000 years old of this skull. And I remember even as a little boy wondering, you know, what that person's life was like, you know, on a day-by-day basis, and realizing that our ancestors survived some really incredible things. And now we live in this time of unbelievable safety and abundance. And so even when things look absolutely terrible, you know, one of my favorite things, it's really silly, but thinking of the pyramids, you know, it must have been pretty cool to be a pharaoh, don't you think? I mean, you know, being a king, like in England, it must have been pretty cool to be a king, but I don't know. I mean, you know, you're a king, okay, fair enough. But pharaoh, your people believed you were a god, right? I mean, pharaoh's another level, right? And so being a pharaoh must have been really cool. But you tell me, what would a pharaoh pay for hot and cold running water?
Anything, like everything.
Well, yeah, like, oh, I turn on the
Everything.
tap and the hot water just comes out, you know,
exactly.
clean. And, you know, and what would a pharaoh pay for a car? You know, what would a pharaoh pay for Google? You know, like, we live in the age of the most unbelievable levels of abundance that, and the beauty is we have the opportunity to be grateful for it because we watched it happen. You see, like, a lot of times technological stuff kind of creeps up on us, and it's like, you know, the plane is a bit like that. You know, if you think about it, over the space of one generation, think of this, there were probably people, not probably, there were definitely people that were alive when the Wright brothers flew for the first time that were later on a transatlantic Concorde flight. So there were people on the early Concorde flights that were alive before the first flight. You know, we live in an age now where technology moves so quickly. And for example, I mean, you're probably not quite old enough to properly remember before Google, but I can tell you, I really remember before Google, you know, and we live in this time now, and then we get caught up in our ridiculous worries and concerns. And I'm not saying, look, I know people have real worries. I've had some real worries and concerns, but I didn't come into this life for it to be, you know, super easy every day. I don't think food tastes so good as like when you're really hungry. And I don't think life feels quite so good if you didn't have some rough times.
Exactly. You need to have some sort of opposition for you to like feel happiness, for you to feel the good hormones in your body. You need to know what it feels like to not have that happen, and to feel like what a normal state is like. So it makes a lot of sense. So in your teenage years then, as you're growing up, when does the first business start, or when does the first adventure start for you? Like, when does that key start turning?
Well, you know, even at the ages of sort of, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, I would go down to the beach and collect seashells and carve a little groove into them and sell them as ashtrays on my street, which is, you know, kind of interesting when you consider I'm like as about anti-smoking as you can get, but you know, I was willing to capitalize on the industry at the time. And you know, and also I did Kool-Aid stands and that sort of stuff. So I had an entrepreneurial mind. The minute the snow started every year, I was out there with a shovel knocking on doors, shoveling sidewalks for money. Same thing in the fall time when the leaves we grew up in Eastern Canada, which is very much like New England. You know, you have all these colored leaves falling all over the place. And I would go and, you know, rake up those leaves. And I got a lot of my early business lessons that way. I remember, like, I still have a vivid memory of going and doing, you know, raking up some leaves for a guy in his garden. And he came out afterward and I was charging by the bag, right? And he came out afterward and he goes, watch this. And he pushed the leaves down and he showed me that I could fit twice as many leaves in one bag. And he goes, now you might think that that's bad for you because you're charging per bag, but what you don't understand is people will tell the difference between high quality work and low quality work. And so as a consequence of that, if you fill these bags lightly, I'm going to know you fill them lightly, and I'm going to be less inclined to hire you again, or I'm going to be less inclined to give you a tip or any of that kind of stuff. Whereas if I see you really packing it in and providing quality, making sure every leaf's off that ground, you're going to create loyalty. And I remember that conversation vividly. And it's translated into everything that I do. If you talk to any of our clients, you'll find that one of the consistent things they talk about is over delivery. You know, I very much believe on under promise, over deliver. And I think that conversation with that guy raking those leaves, that was part of that for me.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's such a simple lesson, but something that I guess can stay with you forever, because it's just that simple of an imagery that whenever you go and attack something, or you come to a crossroads when you're making a decision, you'll always think back to it and think, no, I can do more. I can do more. So it makes a lot of sense. How do you, because you mentioned that you went homeless at 15. How did that happen?
Well, you know, it was just a weird set of events. My father had recently stopped drinking, and my mother and I got into a big row one day. I was a very difficult child. I'm still a very difficult child, frankly. But and so my mom and I got in a big fight. And what I didn't know, and please excuse, especially for the women that are listening, every now and again I talk in stereotypes. I know they're stereotypes. I know it's not fair. But I've noticed occasionally that women test men. In other words, they say stuff they don't totally mean. Like, yes, honey, of course you can go out with your friends on Thursday. Do not go. Like, you know, that's not permission. That's a test. And so I kind of had one of those with my mom where she said, get out of the house. And I was like, okay. I thought that she meant it literally. And I left and I went to go live with my father. And you know, and I think if you were to talk to my mom about it now, even now, I'm not sure if she's sure whether it was literal or not. It was tough times, right? Anyway, so I went to go live with my dad, but he was only recently sober. And, you know, something I've come to understand about addiction is that addiction doesn't end with the substance abuse stopping. Some of the traits of addiction carry on, and my father wasn't ready yet to be a father. I mean, if you really think about it, you know, in AA, they talk about having your AA birthday. You really are reborn that day, because I think that in the depths of addiction, you really don't have any evolution of maturity. And so, you know, sure, my dad might have been, I don't even know how old at the time, but say 36 years old, but he might have had the maturity of a 23-year-old because, you know, and so he wasn't an ideal father. I was far from an ideal son. And so I went to go live with him, and he sent me as a method of dealing with the mismatch between us. He sent me to boarding school, and which I'm grateful for. I wasn't at the time, but he sent me to a really intense, like, you know, kind of, you know, I don't know how to describe it, like something halfway between military school and outward bound, you know, like a really intense school. And I went there for a few years, and halfway through my third year, I decided I would not be going back. And my father didn't agree with me about that. And so he would not let me move back in with him as a, you know, kind of a ploy to get me to go back to the school. And I refused to go back to the school, and that left me homeless. And it was winter, so it was minus 30 outside, Edmonton, Alberta, what have you. And that put me in an interesting place, you know, and so I started off with a little bit of couch surfing here and there. And then, you know, you can only do that for so long. And then one day I noticed there was one of my good friends at the time, his father owned a video arcade, you know, video game arcade. This is back in the Stone Age where we actually had to go put quarters in machines to play video games. I know you can't relate, but that's what it was like. And so I went into the video arcade, and I noticed that the owner, my friend's dad, was tired. And I went up to him and I said, you look really tired. He's like, oh, thanks, you cheeky little crap. So I go, well, I think I can solve your problem. And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, I think you're tired because you're having to come and open the place at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you're here closing it at 2. I said, why don't you let me open it for you? You can stroll in at 12 and I'll close it for you so you can go home at 10 o'clock at night. And I'll just cover those tough hours for you. And he goes, I don't have the budget to hire somebody. I said, you don't have to hire me. Just let me sleep in here at night. And since he wasn't against unlawful child labor, he agreed to the deal. And so, I got myself off the streets and started kind of, in a sense, got my first job. And again, it just showed me that my life was ultimately always going to be up to me.
That I guess early on, by taking those actions and being put in that situation, it just makes you be self-reliant. Like you have to make the decisions to do things on your own at that time. So
yeah, it's given me some interesting perspective with parenting, because there are things that happened to me as a child that I would defend with violence. I would defend my children. I have 2 children. I have a boy and a girl, and I would do anything to prevent them going through some of the things that I went through. But of course, that's ironic because I am grateful for those events in my life. I'm aware that my character was developed because of those things, that I have skills and knowledge and contacts and experience that, ultimately I got because of those events. So that's the weird thing about parenting, is it's like, okay, so I'm going to make sure my kids don't have any opportunities for spiritual growth. Right? Like that's, and that's why I'm now kind of, I joke around that one of my next writing projects is probably going to be to write a book called Detachment Parenting. Why suboptimal parenting is optimal, because we got to give our kids a chance to grow.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's this, it's a balance between loving them so much, but then allowing them to live their own life and have a bit of struggle so that they can actually grow. Because I know you've said this before as well, that some stress is good for you. Like naturally, the fact that you have stress, that's how you grow. Like in the gym, to build muscle, you have to put stress on your body like that. So it makes a lot of sense. So how do you deal with that balancing act, just before we go back to the story?
How do you deal with the balancing act of the stress?
No,
versus the negative stress versus positive stress. That's
of the allowing them to have enough stress to grow, but then with the kids.
Yeah, I think that's that. I mean, look, you don't have kids, right?
No, I'm 26 now. I don't have kids at the moment.
Yeah, so like, I don't know how to put this to you without it sounding a little like condescending, but I'm sure you've had adults say to you, look, you'll understand this when you're older.
Yeah, my dad said it to me plenty of times.
Well, let me tell you, your dad's right. And I'm sorry to say it. My mom called me on my 21st birthday and she said, Eric, she says, happy birthday, congratulations. I think she was saying congratulations because by the time I was 15 or 16, they all figured I'd either be dead or in jail or a millionaire by the time I was 21. They didn't know which, but it was going to be something, right? So my mom calls me up and says, look, congratulations. You've done really well. You're super smart. She goes, but I want you to know that when you get to 30, you're going to realize that as smart as you are, you don't know anything. And I thought, what a condescending, I was like, whatever, woman, arrogant 21-year-old. And so on my 30th birthday, I was forced to call my mother and say, holy crap, who was that kid? What was he even thinking? Like, thank God he wasn't allowed to make any decisions that really affected my life. Like, because you kind of, well, he was allowed, but thank God he didn't. And then this is my mom's response. Wait till you get to 40, then you'll see. And so, that this parenting thing is very much like that. If you don't have kids, you quite literally have zero idea what being a parent is like. And the best way I can try and describe it to you is to say, imagine taking, a piece of your heart and handing it to some stranger and saying, here, you walk around with this. And you walk around with it and I'll put my heart in your hands. And it's like, you suddenly, you open yourself up to feelings of love and connection and joy and happiness far beyond anything you can experience before you have a child. But you also open yourself up to pain and worry and stress that is 100 times more powerful than anything you felt before you had a child, just how it is. So now you're right. It's a real balance. How do you let go and let your kids experience pain because you feel it too? And I think that is the great exploration of parenthood right there is, sometimes Zoe's climbing something and I'm like, oh my God, I want to just stop her right now. Stop climbing that thing. And she climbs everything. And, sometimes I have to make a judgment call. How hard is the surface she might fall on? How far might she fall? And so on. And, a couple of weeks ago, she was climbing up a slide here out on the beach here. And she fell off backwards. She landed on the ground and it hurt, and it hurt me. And, but there's a difference between it hurting her and it injuring her, and it was one of the hardest things in the world to let her get, and then she wanted to go back and climb it again, which I admire her for. But my thing is like, hell no, I don't want to feel that again, but yes, you got to let her. So walking that balance, I think the first thing you have to do is realize that it is fundamentally selfish to try to avoid feeling the pain yourself. You gotta let them make mistakes. You got to. And you just, as a parent, I think what you have to do is try to make a difference between mistakes that might affect their future versus mistakes that might affect them now. And I try to walk that line with both my kids.
Now that you've got kids and you've gone through that experience for a little while, has it changed your relationship that you have with your parents or the way that you see them?
Yeah, I think the minute you have children, your relationship with your parents is fundamentally going to shift in a few ways. Like, for example, you'll never know how much your parents loved you until you have a child. You just, you have no calibration, you just can't know that. And so I think the minute you have a child and you look down at this child and you suddenly realize, holy crap, my parents did this with me. Then I think immediately there's a reconnection to one's parents that I think is really valuable if you allow it. And many people have a hard time with that because they have resentment about their childhood or what have you. And I have zero resentment about my childhood. I really legitimately don't. My view of my childhood is that my parents were doing the very best that they could with the resources of their availability. And that frankly, I get to live the life that I get to live today because of both the what people would call functional things they did for me and because of the dysfunctional things that I was subjected to. But so yes, it absolutely changed my relationship with my parents. That said, I had not only forgiven my parents for these like transgressions or what have you that you might think of in childhood. I'd not only forgiven them, but I had switched to gratitude for them in my 20s. I really had arrived at a place where I could look back at the events of my childhood and go, I am grateful. And I think my father, I think at times found that difficult because of course it's difficult to say, hey, I'm grateful for this thing you did that you feel a lot of guilt and shame about. And I think that's been hard for him, but I think mostly it's been really healthy and having children in my life has been really good for my relationship with my parents.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. I guess it's something for me to look forward to in the coming years. But so just to continue on the sort of timeline, if you will, like, so you're coming up to 20s. What happens then? When does the first business come in and the first adventure, so to speak?
My dad was a lawyer and was on the board of directors. That's kind of a grandiose statement. I think there were two people that were on the board of directors of this guy's company that he was, I think, running out of his living room at the time or just getting ready to move into an office. And he had been struggling to hire salespeople. He'd tried all kinds of different people and nobody worked. And my dad said, you got to try my kid. He can sell anything. You got to hire him. And I was way too young. But the guy interviewed me and we hit it off and I went to go work for him. And that was kind of my first like professional job. I'd done some door-to-door selling and I'd worked at a gas station and I'd done that. But now I was like, it was a fairly professional job. I was doing big deals and it was interesting. Unfortunately, the guy that I was working for was one of the most morally reprehensible, unethical people I've ever met. And I didn't really get that at the time in a lot of ways. There were things that he did or said that at the time, I'm a kid. So I'm going, well, maybe that's kind of acceptable in business. And my internal compass eventually one day got aligned to a point where I was like, no, I can't be treated this way and I can't work this way anymore. And so I quit that job and And through a number of circumstances, a lot of people go, wow, you're so brave starting your first business. But really what happened was that same employer owed me quite a lot of money and opted not to pay me, because he was afraid that if he paid me, I would use the money to capitalize a competitive venture, which I had no interest in. I was done with that industry. I didn't want to be in it anymore. But the difficulty was that I'd relocated to England. I had no money. I had just paid off the last of my debts, and I was at zero, which is a really great place to be when you've been minus zero for a long time. But equally, it meant that I had no money to move home. I had no money, and I didn't have a work visa because my right to work there was relative to my job. And I was kind of stuck. And because he wouldn't pay me the money, I was like really stuck. Matter of fact, I had a really good job offer to go and become a stockbroker in Grand Cayman, which is what I wanted. I mean, I'm living in the Caribbean now. I really wanted to move to the Caribbean, but he wouldn't pay. And then one day, one of my clients called me and said, hey, listen, I need your help. I need some of these computers. And I said, I don't do that anymore. I'm not in that business. And he goes, look, you could do one deal, you could make some money. And I go, I feel like I don't really want to be competing with my old boss, and I don't want to take you away from him. You should really call them. And he goes, you need to understand that we would never, ever have been doing business with him ever if it wasn't for you working there. We've never liked him. We don't like the way he does business, but you're the thing that held us there. So I'm happy to draft a letter right now that tells, whoever's interested that you didn't pull us away, that we were only there for you. And it turned out that was a very common thread in a lot of the clients that I was representing at that time. And so, one thing led to another. I had rent to pay, and I did the deal. I knew where to get the equipment. I bought the equipment. I sold it to him. I made like 6,000 or 7,000 pounds profit, where when I was a salesperson, I might've made 1,000 pounds commission. And I was like, hey, I'm a business owner now. And I started the business in my living room. I used my garage in Rington, in just outside Bristol, in the west of England. And I started off shipping stuff out of my garage until, about a year later, my neighbor started complaining about all the UPS and FedEx trucks because our business was doing well. And I was forced to move out to a warehouse, and one thing led to another. 9 years later, I sold the business and sort of retired from the IT sector.
Yeah, no, that's kind of a crazy story, because I know you've talked about on other episodes with other podcasts where you've mentioned, I think about 10 years you were in England.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And then after that you moved over to, so were you doing the IT business for that span of time? And then
Well, I was in the IT company as an employee for about 7 years, I guess. And then in 97, I started the business in England. And then, 9 years later, 2006-ish, I sold the business. And at that point, I just decided to play. I'm a big fan of gap years. I think that people should, wherever possible, take gap years between any major shift in their life. It's not just I finished high school, now I want to go to university. Gap year. I think it's like, I finished high school, now I'm going to university, gap year. I finished university, now I'm going to go work in the real world, gap year. And now I'm in a job and I'm making a major shift. I should take another gap year. Like, I think, let's not wait till retirement to enjoy our lives. I think that if we take time to have these mini retirements in the meantime, then first of all, we enjoy our life a whole lot more. And secondly, we gain a bunch of perspective. And so I did that. I sold the business and I just traveled. I traveled, I bought a round the world plane ticket, flew around the world, 15 different cities. It was a phenomenal trip. I did it again, another one. Then I met my wife, where I already knew her during that time, but we a spark connected between us. We started dating. She started traveling with me. And for about 2 years, all we did is travel around the world. I did some speaking, for fun and that sort of stuff, but really not about money. And then that led up to one day I had an opportunity to buy a movie studio in Northern California. And that was my next entrepreneurial venture. I bought the movie studio. We worked on some incredible movies. We started another company that did Hollywood special effects type work, but for intelligence services, CIA, DEA, military. Businesses. But it was during that time that I got a life-changing phone call, and that was from Tony Robbins' company. And they asked me to come and teach business and marketing at his business mastery programs. And I honestly thought the call was a joke. I thought it was a practical joke. I mean, why would they be calling me? I was a big fan of Tony's because I'd been listening to him do you know what tapes? I'm kidding. But I've been listening to it on tapes. And so when I got the call, I thought it was a joke, but it turned out to be real. They needed a last minute fill-in speaker. And I went there with this idea that if I did really, really well, maybe they'd call me again. And that's exactly what happened. You know, I ended up, you know, touring with Tony for a year and a half or so. And it was just phenomenal. And that really woke me up to a tremendous level of enjoyment when it came to coaching people and speaking and sharing distinctions. And basically, you know, I think in the simplest sense, I really love helping people upgrade their quality of life.
Yeah. So on that note then, because it's interesting you say that, because I was going to ask you, when does this idea of like creating a freedom-based lifestyle or creating your lifestyle in such a way that you can have those gap years or travel the world whilst you're still making money or doing the things and looking after the responsibilities that you need to? Because for most people, the way that you describe that, it's quite elusive or like an esoteric type of thing that's only for certain people. So I know that you coach and mentor people on exactly that. So if you were to start over, what would be the first steps you take to create that type of exceptional life?
Well, I'm a big believer that entrepreneurship is the ultimate expression of personal freedom and liberty. I say it all the time. It's like a catchphrase for me. I really believe that that's true. And the trouble is that the vast majority of people who attempt, entrepreneurship, they don't practice it correctly. You know, it's funny. I was just on a podcast earlier today, and the guy says, well, you know, it's a jungle out there. And I go, you know what? It's only a jungle out there if you don't have a guide to get you through the jungle. And you know, nobody would go deep into the jungle without a guide, and yet people will go into business without a guide all day long. The jungle, you could die. In business, okay, maybe you're not going to die, but you could lose it all. You could put your family in jeopardy. You could put your savings in jeopardy. You could put your future in jeopardy. And when we recognize that 4 out of 5 businesses won't make it till their 5th anniversary, I'm going to have to say that it's a risky idea to start a business. And then you get into this next level where the 1 in 5 that make it through the 5th anniversary, they don't get there having fun. They're not thriving. They're working too hard. They're sacrificing their health. They're not spending enough time with their families. You know, they're suffering. And many times they're not even making the additional money that in theory is making the suffering worth it. And so when I started my business, it came at a very interesting time in my life. You know, I had quit my previous job. I had been publishing a magazine online, the very first personal development e-zine, like when I started publishing it in 1994, most people didn't even have email. So I was really ahead of the curve on this. And I started publishing it. And, 2 years later, I had 70,000 subscribers in 70 countries. And every single week I was doing a book review, writing articles. And what it really forced me to do was take a deep dive into personal development, business development, marketing, health, all this stuff. I was studying it all the time for my journal. And so when I ended up starting my business, I decided to turn my life into an experiment. That's all it was. As funny enough, I had thought about becoming like a motivational speaker because I had all this stuff. I mean, I had listened to everything that Brian Tracy ever recorded. I'd listened to Jim Rohn. I'd listened to Tony Robbins. If you want to make changes in your life, you have to make massive decisions, take action. I mean, I could have jumped on stage and I could have regurgitated any of the stuff that I'd learned. But the fact is I wasn't an example of it yet. And I don't have a great deal of respect for the fake it till you make it style coach or speaker. And so I decided to turn my life into an experiment. And I said, what if I could build a business that I could sell one day? What if I could build a business that allowed me to take unreasonable levels of vacation? And I just started applying all the stuff that I learned to building that business. And it worked. I mean, every single year that I started that, every single year that I owned that business for 9 years, I took 12 to 14 weeks of vacation.
Is that the IT business or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In England. And, people would come up to me and go, well, Eric, hold on a minute now. How could you do that? And I'm like, how could you not do that? Like, one of the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs have is that they learned an incredibly bad habit in school. And the bad habit in school was, in school, if you work with someone else on an assignment, it's called cheating. And so we, for 12 years, were indoctrinated that we have to do everything ourselves. And so I was like, well, no, I don't want to do everything myself. I I want to leverage people. I want to give them great opportunities. I want to help them buy houses. I want them to live wonderfully. And I want them to earn all that by making my life really easy and making my business grow. And so when you take, and by the way, when I say 12 to 14 weeks of vacation, you need to know, like, first of all, this predates roaming on cell phones, right? You couldn't just take your phone to another country and buy a SIM card, or, you weren't reachable. If you take a look at this picture here, this is a perfect example. That was one of those trips. I'm on horseback in a game reserve in Africa, and that is a white rhino. Like, you couldn't reach me that day. You couldn't reach me that week. And so what that meant was my company had to learn to operate without me. Sure, people made mistakes and it was expensive, but you know what? Experience comes from bad judgment. Good judgment comes from experience. If I don't let them have some experience, they're not going to have good judgment. And I would say one of the biggest reasons I was able to achieve business freedom was that I let people make mistakes, including me.
So yeah, so is that more to do with the business owner's ego and control and wanting to like get all the details right and not let anyone move without their say so? It's like allowing them the freedom to just have their authority, but obviously in a trained manner.
Yeah, of course, with good proceduralization and documentation. Look, we have a 12-month program called Business Freedom 365, and it guides people step by step by step. Like, you do this, you document that, you proceduralize this, you hire this way, because there are steps you take. But look, I'll tell you one of the most magical experiences. One day after selling my company, I got this invitation from, I don't know if you know Daniel Priestley at Triumphant Events in London.
Yeah, I'll be interviewing him next month as well.
Excellent. So Daniel called me up one day and he says, would you come and do a talk? And I was like, sure. What do you want me to talk about? I wasn't a speaker. And he goes, I just want you to come and tell the story about your business, about how you sold it. And I was like, sure. And I show up and do this talk. And if I remember right, there's about 80 people there. And all of a sudden people are asking me questions, and it's making me remember stuff, like stuff that you've kind of filed away, but the questions are bringing it up into my conscious mind. And so one day somebody then asked me about, hiring and this kind of stuff. And I realized I hadn't hired anybody in years because my company did that already. Suddenly I had this memory. I remember it distinctly still now, is walking into my office, walking into my warehouse, because to get to my office, I had to walk through the warehouse. And I walked through the warehouse one day and I saw Dude over here. Dude. I didn't know who Dude was. Who's Dude? So I go over to the warehouse manager, go, who's Dude? And he goes, oh, that's the guy we interviewed last week and we decided to hire him. And I had nothing to do with it. I mean, I approved the budget. They have a budget and they can make their hiring decisions. But you see, suddenly it reminded me that I really got off on the company having autonomy. And unfortunately, most entrepreneurs get off on the significance of having control. I'll give you a great example. See, I'm pretty good with computers. I grew up playing video games. I was homeless and got myself a night, like I was able to sleep for weeks in a video arcade to keep myself from freezing to death. And I think you can imagine, this is before game consoles and stuff. Can you imagine how much sleep you would get if we locked you in a video arcade with, 80 video games? How much sleep would you get?
Exactly.
Not a lot. And so I played with computers and I was good at them even, and by the way, I didn't have computers in school. I was right at that age. My generation didn't get computers until our final year of school. So it's not like I was in the computer generation. I was but because of games. Well, as a consequence, I was the one who set up our computers at work. I was the one who installed the network. I learned that stuff because I wasn't afraid of computers. But eventually our company got big enough, I had to hire an IT manager. I hired an IT manager. I'm paying the guy, what, 40, 50,000 pounds a year? I don't remember, but I mean, a reasonable salary to be my IT manager. But guess what the staff was still doing? Asking me, right? And they were asking me because they knew I could fix it faster than the IT manager or whatever, because he was new. And then I realized that what was going on is they would challenge me. They'd be like, hey, Eric, my computer's so messed up this time, there's no way you're going to be able to fix it. And I'd walk over, I'd saunter over, I'd click a few buttons, computer would be fine, right? And I would get significance out of that. And one day I realized I was getting significance out of it. I was like feeling good about it. I was like, holy crap, that's so wrong. I mean, I'm paying this guy over here and I'm getting some weird significance boost from fixing the computer. I said, why don't I get the significance boost by having an IT manager that I don't have to? So, then it would be, hey, Eric, I bet you can't fix it this time. And I'd look at them and go, you know that I could. Call the IT manager.
Yeah.
And
No,
by
I
the way,
remember that.
the only way the IT manager is going to get good at it is with practice.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
Anything comes with repetition. Exactly. And then again, you're wasting your money away because that's the whole point you hired it. So it
yeah,
makes
my
a lot.
time and my money. Money I can replace. My time is gone.
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes sense. So, just before we get into Wildfit and a couple of bits there, what were some of the? Do you remember some of the craziest adventures or stories that still come to mind
About
about
what
just generally that
business?
you've been on in your life? No, whether it's
Oh, geez.
outside of business in terms of like traveling.
I tell you, there's too many to think of. Much like that picture, there was a day where I was out horseback riding with some friends, and we were in a game reserve, and we'd been tracking some rhinos, and we couldn't find them in the end, and we got lost, like out in the middle of nowhere. We got lost, and so by the time we figured out where we were, we got ourselves onto a fire road, but it was getting dark, so we didn't want to be riding in the open bush. There's animals out there, and it's dangerous. So we were riding on the fire road. It's a dirt road, and we're late, and you shouldn't be out riding at night. Just as a point of interest, there are certain cats that only hunt at night. Like, I don't want to be out there at night riding food, right? So anyway, we're riding really, really, we're at a good canter, not galloping, but the horses are really flying. And then suddenly there were four of us. All four of our horses came to a dead stop, like from canter to dead stop. And somehow not one of us came out of the saddle. I don't know how. And then four subadult white rhinos crossed the road running in front of us. And what had happened is that as we were galloping, we'd woken them up. They were sleeping under a tree or something, but we saw from the tracking. And we'd woken them up, but rhinos have really terrible eyesight, so all they can really judge on is smell and sound. All they could hear is these animals galloping. Well, remember, for them, prey animals galloping means danger. So they're like, well, hell, we better gallop too. So now they're galloping alongside us, but we can't hear them because our horses are running and the wind is in our ears, but the rhinos are right beside us. And the rhinos finally decided they needed to take a closer look, so they turned in front of us. It was one of the scariest things ever. But luckily, nobody hurt. Everybody survived. And, you get to calibrate your adrenal system that way. Later on, when somebody cuts you off in traffic, you're like, oh, whatever. You're not a rhino.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's crazy. That is crazy. That's not something that you'd experience every single day. So
I've been lucky that way.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you remember that's in the safari, outside the safari, halfway around the world?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I think that one of the things that I'm really aware of is that we, our instincts and our biochemistry and stuff really evolved for a different time. They evolved for a time when we spent most of our time, obviously, outdoors, hunting and gathering, and in very small social communities, but obviously much tighter social communities. Like, for example, we didn't evolve the instincts in psychology for a pair of people to raise family. We were meant to raise them in a culture, in a village. And, there's all kinds of these miswirings. And I think that our current civilization is at a mismatch with our instincts. And so these days, very often people experience stress over things that are distinctly not that stressful, but we don't know the difference. So, people receive a visa bill and they produce the same chemical fear response in their body they would that if they just saw a lion. But that's because they've never seen a lion. And so I think that when people create opportunities for themselves to go out and do these kind of adventures, and, just last week, we have this annual life planning retreat that we run here in Cabarete in the Dominican Republic. It's a week-long process where we help people, we've broken life down into 5 pillar areas that you must handle in order to live an outstanding and exceptional life. And those 5 areas have sub areas. And so each day for 5 days, we work deeply on those areas, identifying what specifically needs to change and what specifically needs to happen to make that area phenomenal. Then, though, we take a day off and we do an activity. So, for example, this last week, the activity we did was a canyoning trip. And we went in, I'm telling you, it was so beautiful. It's like out of an Indiana Jones movie or something, where you're in the middle of these gorgeous canyons cut out by flowed water, and the colors, the water is this soft, powdery blue. It was just stunning. But every now and again, as we're going along, we'd be faced with a choice: jump off this rock into the deep pool or rappel down, either one of which can be quite terrifying. One of the jumps we were doing was 8 meters. Right? Or what is that? 20 some odd feet.
Yeah.
Right? It's a serious jump. And what's interesting is that when you face things like that, you fire your adrenals correctly in a positive way. When you then come back to your life and petty stuff happens, you don't fire inappropriate amounts of adrenaline anymore because your body has calibrated. And so, you know, I've had a number of experiences like that, some that I've chosen and some that I haven't. You know, to your question, my ex-wife and I, we were in a casino one day when 4 guys walked in with automatic assault rifles and started shooting. That'll fire your adrenals. You know, they you know, glass flying everywhere, people screaming. You know, luckily nobody was killed. They were just there to rob the place, but we didn't know that, you know, and, you know, so the whole adventure about how we dealt with that. And I grabbed my wife and I took her into the kitchen because I immediately, everybody else is running like sheep. And I'm like, I don't want to be near, if this is like a mass shooting, I don't want to be near people. Right. And so I just assessed a really functional meaning. And the meaning was, I don't want to be around people if this is going down. And I thought, well, you know what, here's another meaning. These guys, no matter what they're here to do, they're here to rob, they're here to kill. It doesn't, whatever they're here to do, they are not here to do it in the kitchen. They're not here for a sandwich. And so I took my wife and grabbed her hand and pulled her into the kitchen and shut the door and went into the kitchen. And so, you know, here's this life experience. I didn't will it. I didn't create it. You know, I didn't want it. But in the end, I look at it and go, wow, I'm really glad that it happened in my life and that everybody came out okay and safe. But in the meantime, that it allows me to put the rest of my life into some kind of perspective.
Yeah, that's exactly what those sort of situations do. And I think if we're able to, we don't necessarily have to be in those situations, but if we just look at it from, I guess the other thing that helps is looking at it from the point of view that you look at your life from the end, and then look back and think about the things that you would have regretted not doing, because it's the things that we miss out on that we regret not doing, right?
Yeah.
Not the things that we actually did. So I don't think you have to be put in those dangerous situations to put your life into perspective. It's just like, let me put myself mentally in a place where I'm feeling that feeling of regret or the emotions I don't want to feel. And then that can recalibrate the thoughts that you have in your mind or your feelings or your hormones. So,
well, and I would add something really important to that. This is a big part of what we go through at Isaiah, is that we don't acknowledge bad feelings. There are no bad feelings.
Yeah.
There are no bad emotions. You know, the emotions are the ultimate life coach. And so when you talk about the emotions we don't want to feel, what we're really saying is that we're trying to shut off the coaching. So, you know, when somebody starts to feel shame and they pull away from it, what they're taking away from themselves is the incredible opportunity to learn. And I think that's part of all this stuff, is that recognizing we are, you know, people always have that thing of, you know, religion is like you realizing that you're here in a physical body having a spiritual experience, where spirituality is realizing you're a spiritual body coming down here and having a physical experience. And now I would take that another step further and go, yeah, it may well be that you're a spiritual being coming down here to have a chemical experience, right? Like you're producing all these chemicals that create the way you feel. And so I didn't come down here for it to be bland. I came down here for it to be interesting. And so, you know what? Shame is interesting. Embarrassment is interesting. I just recently had a situation where one of my partners, one of the people I do quite a lot of business with, made a decision I didn't like. And it was contrary to what I thought we'd agreed. But we hadn't agreed. It was an assumption I'd made. And so I wrote back a kind of, frankly, manipulative response. I wrote back and I didn't like what I wrote. And I only realized it after I sent it, and I was sitting at home and I was like, oh, I'm not that kind of person. What is that? Shame. Well, what many times people do is they start to feel the shame, and they're like, I got to talk to somebody. I got to watch TV. I got to take a drug. I got to take a drink. I got to do something. I eat something. I'll get rid of the shame. And instead what I did is I went into the shame full on. I was like, holy, this is painful. And then I took out my computer and I shamefully wrote an apology and said, guys, I'm sorry. This is not me. I made an assumption. You guys are totally in the right here. And I really apologize. And then I did the most painful thing in the world. I hit send. And I sent it, you know. But you know what's really fascinating is, first of all, it can only serve to improve my relationship with them, that they see that I'm willing to step in. And the other side is that it will prevent me doing things like that in the future. And that's what these emotions are about. So I'm a big fan of emotional exploration.
That's interesting. That's an interesting way to look at it. Rather than us being reactive to our emotions, we're responding accordingly. You know, trying to look at what's it actually telling me. Where is it directing me? Why am I feeling this way? Just diving a bit deeper. Most people just shut it off, as you said, a drink or a drug, and then only focus on the good, like the hormones or responses. And you're right. There isn't a good or bad.
I like to think emotions are like all these really super, like gorgeous big horses. And if you train them, if you jump on them and you ride them right, then they can become the jet fuel that propels you into a phenomenal existence. But if you try to ignore them, then they will trample you, or they will stampede and they will take you places you don't want to go. And so so when something like shame or guilt or resentment comes along, or hatred, you got to like play it out. Don't run from it. I heard somebody saying once, like, maybe what you need to do if you want revenge is you got to go get the revenge you want in your head, play it out, let the emotions happen. And by not suppressing the emotion, you can burn it out and learn from it.
Mm. No, that's an interesting way to look at it. So just before we get into the final few questions, I just want to get into Wildfit, how that came about, because I know that was, I think if I'm not mistaken, the fact that you wanted to give entrepreneurs some more peak, allow them to perform at their most highest level without burning out, without feeling like they're ruining their health, so that they could focus on other areas of problems in the world, solving more creative issues, whatever it might be, basically putting their gifts and talents to better use. So
Yeah,
yeah, if you
it's
could talk a
even,
bit.
that's a small version of it. The larger issue for me was that I was always really quite sick as a child, and I had all kinds of allergies and difficulties and what have you. And medical experts did nothing to help me, except occasionally get some symptoms to let up for a little while. But I mean, and it wasn't until I made some decisions around my food that I experienced a complete health renaissance. I mean, I dropped 35 pounds, or 10 kilos or so. I all my symptomology went away, and I became a new person. And then I became really curious about why it is that I could change my diet, and in 30 days I could undo all of the disease or all the symptoms and pain that I was in, that 10 years of visiting doctors had done nothing with. And so that really was the beginning of Wildfit, in the sense that was 1991. By 1995, I had arrived to some of my initial conclusions about the direction that we should be going in from a health perspective. I wrote an article in 95, 96 called The Human Diet, suggesting that, the basic theory being is that all living things on Earth have a diet. When David Attenborough talks about the elephant, he talks about the elephant's diet. And the elephant's diet is to eat 200 kilograms of bark and grass every day, and a little bit of seasonal fruit, and to drink 70 liters of water. That's the elephant's diet. And a leafcutter ant has a diet, and so on. And my theory basically is, if every species on Earth has a diet, so do humans. And so one of our most important explorations in terms of human well-being could be to try to determine what that diet is, without the influence of profit mongering and pharmaceuticals and all that kind of stuff. Just truly get down to it. And that marked a moment in my life where I really started undertaking some fascinating research. Then you're right. We were teaching business, and a lot of my clients were wondering how it is that I can fly all over the place and maintain my fitness and my health, and, not get jet lag. And how do I have all this energy? I'm not 24 anymore. How is it that I can live like this? And so I started doing some health talks. And what frustrated me was that I would tell people exactly what to do. Like, look, eat less of this, eat more of that, move like this. And I'm telling you, 30 days later, you'll have it. And they wouldn't do it. Some would, but many wouldn't. And that bothered me. And so one day I decided to create an experience that would, in effect, force the change upon people in their subconscious. And so I took the first 8 clients through the very first version of the Wildfit Challenge. And week by week by week, we played some psychological games. We made some nutritional changes, and all 8 of them got through the program, and all 8 of them got incredible results. And so then we did it again, and we did it again, and we did it again. Pretty soon we had classes with 30, 40 people. And then we had classes with 200. Then we had a class with over 1,000 people. And it was just growing by word of mouth. And to this day, I mean, it is absolutely routine for us to receive messages from people that they've turned around their type 2 diabetes, that their cancer is in remission, that their fibroids are gone, that they no longer need a hysterectomy, that, this is routine for us at this point. And it's the thing that I am, aside from my children, it's the thing that I am most proud of creating in the world.
Yeah, most definitely, and I love the fact that you did create and you continued it forward, because it's something that I've personally found an issue with. Just like you, when you were younger, you had obviously health issues and whatever it might be, And then it was only until you took it into your own hands that it actually resolved itself. And I did a similar thing. And I've talked about this on some of the episodes before, where I had quite a big skin disorder. So it was eczema, hives, name it. It was like full body, head to toe. And I always had steroid creams, steroid tablets, like injections, the whole lot. And none of it was really going away. There was only sort of treating the symptom, not the root cause. Now, the thing that spiraled me into doing heavy amounts of research was, it wasn't until I started addressing the issues of the gut, which is with food, which is where
it's a big topic.
Yeah, that was when a lot of my research just went like out of control, because all of it was the gut. And then I think it was, if I remember correctly, it's Hippocrates in the Greek or Latin times that says all disease begins in the gut, or something along those lines. And the more research I did, the more I found the gut's everything. Like all the bacteria is there. Like it has more bacteria than we do. Like that's like a second brain basically. And so I don't know how much that plays into the way that you coach or mentor someone.
It does, but there's a correction. And, when they say that all disease begins in the gut, then I have to respond with, then it actually began in your mouth.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It doesn't even get to the gut without passing through chewing. And so we determine the vast majority of our health by making sure that we get all of our nutritional needs met and that we reduce the toxic load on our body. And that is it. I mean, it is that simple. And we are at a place today where we're beginning to understand that so many of what we consider to be diseases are really just imbalances that can be massively improved or impacted by changing nutrition and diet. And that's recognizing that it matters that we put in enough of the good stuff and then we don't put in too much of the bad stuff. And it's vitally important.
So for those who are listening, who are let's say they're completely out of shape at the moment, they know they want to get into better health. Forget the exercise part. Let's just talk about in terms of
absolutely true.
Yeah.
Exercise will not make anyone healthy. It will make them healthier if they are healthy. But I would put to you that look, the vast majority of people in the Western world are overweight and undernourished at the same time. So they are both quite literally overeating garbage and starving to death at the same time. And what that means is that if they then decide they're going to exercise their way out of it, they're going to put more physical demands on the body with too much weight to carry around and not have the right nutrients to create the kind of maintenance and repair cycle that's needed for that extra activity. And they're going to mess up their knees. They're going to mess up everything because they're exercising while unhealthy. The very first thing that somebody should do to turn their health around is reevaluate their relationship with the food production chain. The way our food is produced is unconscionable, and it is produced without any care or thought to the life experience of the people eating that food. It is produced for profitability.
Yeah, I think anyone that does some research will soon quickly realize that. I found that to be the case with milk. And the more I thought about it, the more it was just common sense. I didn't need to read articles. I don't need to see documentaries, even though there are lots of resources. It's like, why are we drinking another species of milk? Like, that's a cow. It's not human. It doesn't make sense. What if we drank cow's milk when we were first born instead of our mother's milk? I can only imagine what would happen. It doesn't make sense. So,
and I mean, I would go a step further on that logical connection. It is not even cows drink milk. Calves do. Yeah, exactly. No, that's crazy. So just to get into the final few questions then, I mean, you've been on a crazy adventurous journey and, you've picked up a lot of wisdom along the way. You've spoken to a lot of people. You've mentored a lot of people. Is there anything that you would tell the 18-year-old who's listening out there right now, who's probably at the beginning of their journey, just thinking about what they want their life to look like? Yes. And I don't know that it would be worth telling them because at 18, they can't hear it yet, but I would really want to suggest to them, stop worrying. Like, just stop it. There's no point, if you're put it in perspective, you're standing or sitting on a rock that's whipping through space at 65,000 miles an hour with a million other objects in space around a huge, constantly exploding ball of gas. I mean, if you're looking for certainty, you came to the wrong place. And so, I think that one of the things that I would go back and tell myself at 18, if I had the opportunity, is relax, take some chances, be willing to make mistakes, set your ego aside, be generous. and you know, create a lot of social credit with people, because at the end of the day, if you lose everything, you still have your people, and that's it. Move forward.
Yeah, I love that. So the second question is, if there was one statement that you could write on a piece of paper that would go into a time capsule for generations from now to read, what would that one statement be?
Technology killed us.
Okay.
That's
So
what it would be. I really believe that we are our own worst enemy, and that our activities in technology, I'm more and more, I'm beginning to believe that the Mennonites are right. That yes, technology is an ultimately incredible thing that can make our lives really easy and unbelievably pleasurable, and can create all kinds of opportunities for creative expression and love and freedom and fun. And that it can also enslave us. And that, you know, you're now already dealing with people that are having widespread problems with Netflix addiction and phone addiction, and I want you to imagine that the realism of entertainment has improved so dramatically in the last 30 years that it's on this unbelievably steep curve. We're about 10 years away from video game experiences that will be almost indecipherable from real life. And I want to know, you know, why do people bother saving up for a Caribbean vacation when they can just go to one in their living room? Why does anybody go on a ski trip to Aspen when they can just go on one in their living room and it feels just as real? At the end of the day, what we're after is the chemical feeling. And as technology gets us closer and closer, look, we're already seeing countries that are having major problems with negative population growth, which may sound funny because you want population growth, but you don't want negative population growth. You need the population to keep moving forward, at least neutrally, to maintain tax levels and social development and infrastructure and what have you. But now you've got countries that are having a hard time getting people to get married because they're so wired up by technology that you know, there's a country which I won't bother naming at this point, but I know two countries, in fact, that have such a major problem with porn addiction that the men are barely even dating anymore. You know, and that and so, you know, we're yeah, I know it sounds morbid, but that would be my message to the future is we you know, because in the future I think we may go through a stage where technology is gone and we have to start again. And I think that we need to be really careful about what we do with technology. I think that it is the greatest gift and the ultimate power of freedom, but it equally could take it all away from us.
yeah, depending on how you look at it, it can be a blessing and a curse. It's just how we use it, you know. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but you know, it's how we use it, but we have to recognize that it's now using us.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
was gonna say, yeah.
I read once that something like 70% of the software that's created by Google now is created by software. So you've got software writing software.
Yeah.
And then you think about like Facebook. Facebook is designed to be addictive. It's free for a reason because it's not free. It's incredibly expensive. You pay for it with your time and attention. And so they want to make it as addictive as possible. So you'll give it even more of your time and attention. Well, don't think for a second you can outthink a computer. Don't think for a second that you can, it will find ways to hook us back all the time. And so I think this is, again, one of the reasons that when we talk about taking these mini vacations, I think that like going to places like, listen, this is a journey for me as well. Just recently, I was in a really beautiful resort in Koh Samui, Thailand, just a few weeks ago. It's called Kemalaya. I think it's incredible. It's a gorgeous place. One of the owners saw me speaking at another conference. He said, "Hey, would you come and check out our place? Because we think maybe you should come and do some work there in retreats." I went down, checked it out, sat down for my first dinner. Remember, I didn't book this retreat. They booked it. They wanted me to come evaluate it. So I'm a guest, right? I get there. I sit down for dinner, order my food. I'm really excited because it's a really nice mas men curry that I wanted so badly. And it's on its way. And then you know what I think? You know what? I've been with people for a week solid. I'm kind of an introvert. You know what I'd like to do? I'd like to watch some bubblegum content, just watch a movie or something. And I get my phone ready. I've got my earphones. And then they show me there's a little wooden plaque on the table. It's not paper, it's wooden carved in. And it says, "This is a digital free environment. We don't allow any electronic devices in the dining room in a spirit of trying to help people create connectivity and quiet time." Not even Kindles. Not even sit there and read your Kindle. I mean, we're talking fascism here. And here's what's really telling. My reaction. I was angry. I was angry the way a 12-year-old is when you take away their device. It's like, what? I didn't say anything. I was more composed than that. But in my head, I was like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm a guest here. You guys brought me down here to look at your resort, and now you're telling me what I can and can't do. And I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell them they can package up my food and deliver it to my room. I'm like having a tantrum in my head. And then I laughed at myself. I was like, you bonehead. You are proving why this is like this. And so I sat down and enjoyed my dinner. And I will tell you something. The meal they brought me was one of the truly best meals I've had in my life. And my question to myself would be, would I even have noticed if I was sitting there watching another episode of Breaking Bad?
Yeah. Yeah. It's in this day and age when we're so like not present, basically, that I think that's what it makes us do more so than not. Because I think we're especially in London, you know, you've been here, so like, you know what it's like. It's just constant on the go. No one stops to have a break. No one talks to each other. It's just, and then the fact that we have devices now, we now have an excuse to break away from people. So it just makes it worse. So no, I completely understand that statement. So the final question then, you've had a long, healthy life, whatever age it might be, you've come to the end of that. What is the legacy you want to leave behind?
You know, I'm not so fussed with that. You know, I think the only real legacy that I'm particularly interested in is that my children are functionally independent and as happy as they can be. And that, and, you know, I'd like to believe that the planet will be in good shape for them. I don't always believe that that's true, but I'd like to believe that could be the case, that we could turn things around. And, you know, I suppose Wildfit, if I think in legacy terms, you know, which I do sometimes, you know, I was awarded a medal by the Canadian Senate, which really made me start to think a little bit about, wow, what we're doing really is important and impactful. And so maybe if I think about legacy in those terms, you know, maybe I'd like to be remembered as somebody who had a really massive impact on people's quality of life by changing their relationship with food, by having an impact on the way food is regulated and produced, as somebody who massively reduced the social costs of medicine. You know, and you know, you're in Britain and you can brag all about your social Medicare like Canada does, and you know, everybody in America is like, I wish we had it like England. But I got to tell you something, people keep eating the way they do. Nobody's going to be able to afford universal health care.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't even matter, because half the time it's not in balance. We're taking medicine for the wrong reasons, and we take it for the first time we feel something. Oh, I've got a headache. Oh, let's take paracetamol. Antibiotics. It doesn't matter. To be honest, it doesn't matter. You still have to do your own research, as you've done and as I've started to do, about what real medicine actually is. And that comes down to food, nutrition, health, sleep, breathing, all of that stuff, which you can do yourself. You don't need someone to prescribe that.
Exactly right.
So yeah, no, this conversation's been enlightening. You know, I loved it. I wish we could go on forever, because there's so many more things we could talk about, but we definitely have to do this sometime again soon. And just before we finally wrap up, what are the best places for people to follow you on your journey, and all the things that you do?
Absolutely. Well, you know, my website has general information. That's www.eric.ee, Eric's with a C. And so www.eric.ee. And I'm on Facebook. I'm very, you know, I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram. I manage my own Instagram. So if you're following me on Instagram and you get comments and stuff, that's actually me writing. Whereas on other platforms, I do have a social team that's helping with that sort of thing. But I think that, and my, you know, I think that those are great places to keep track of what we've got going on from Business Freedom and Wildfit. Obviously, businessfreedom.com, good place to look. Getwildfit.com, another great place to look for more specific topics.
Awesome. Well, no, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and I wish you all the best.
All good. Thank you very much for having me. And yeah, let's maybe do a follow-up sometime in the future.